Michael's outfit was made of junk food boxes. He wore an Oreo hat with earrings made of Fruit Loops.
I'd like to make an outfit out of food. That way you wouldn't have to go to the kebab shop afterwards.
But you might be naked by the end of the night.
You might be, because someone's like pinching a chip off your back.
I would not be pinching a club where everyone's farting and you're sweating and you probably got like drinks spilled on you. I would not be stealing a chip from their back.
I think it'd be great. Or and then you'd have a mayonnaise as a bra, so you're like dipping in the chips. Everyone's having fun and you're crying because someone's dumped you. Your girlfriends hate you.
Yeah, you could just sit on the floor and sob while you eat your chips. Welcome to the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating things, a weekly variety podcast that gives you just enough information to stand your ground at any social gathering.
We explore stories from the darker corners of true crime, the hidden gems of history, and the jaw-dropping deeds of extraordinary people.
I'm, of course, Kyle Reese, your ringmaster for this episode.
And I'm Adam Cox, your monkey hairstylist for this week's episode.
Because even the monkeys need to look good, right?
They have got to look hot.
A chimp in his little bikini and his little updo, little beehive.
Nice little wig.
I just assumed he was a man there.
I don't know. I'm not going to put names on things.
It's appropriate for this week.
Okay.
Because we're going into the world of drag, potentially.
Drag?
Adam, it's an exciting one.
Okay.
It's a good one. But, of course, before we get into today's episode, we have some awesome new Patreon members that we want to welcome to the Compendium family.
Yeah, we've had quite a few that have joined recently, so welcome.
Do you know what? I think it's off the back of the Belle Gibson episode and the Gabby Petito.
So your episodes, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we just had an influx of new Patreons, so much appreciated. Who are they, Adam?
Well, we want to welcome Jessica Sue Mackey, Madison Poston, Danielle Jones, Janine Elizabeth, Paddy, and Matthew Carter.
That's right. We also have Lois, we have Fenella Bella, we have Ali, we have Brenda Munson, and Josephine Gothenberg. Thank you all so much for joining. Your support really means the world to us.
Remember, freaks, signing up on Patreon not only supports the show, but also gives you early access to next week's episode, a full 7 days before anyone else hears it.
If you've already devoured all of our free episodes and you're craving even more, consider becoming a certified freak for exclusive early access to our content up to 6 weeks before everyone else.
And lastly, please drop us a review wherever you're listening. It helps more people discover the Compendium and join this wonderful community of freaks.
That is it for the housekeeping for this week. Because Adam, today we are diving into an assembly of glitter, glamour, madness, and murder.
Interesting. You've hinted to drag queens. So what drag queen has killed someone?
Yes, exactly. What drag queen has killed someone? That's the first question you ask when you see like RuPaul walking down that main runway. Like, who she killed this week?
Yeah, it puts a whole new meaning to slay.
100%. Adam.
Yes.
In March of 1996, a massive storm has just swept across Staten Island, and 3 kids head out to the beach to see if the storm has washed up anything interesting. As they scan the shoreline, something catches their eye. As they move closer, they discover a large cardboard box, bizarrely, is completely taped shut. Clearly, this wasn't rubbish, so maybe they think whatever's inside might be valuable. So driven by curiosity and armed with a couple sticks, they start poking at the soggy cardboard, and as the cardboard starts to peel away, their intrigue turns to horror as through the gaping holes in the box, the motionless, unmistakable form of 5 fingers and a palm starts to appear. This wasn't treasure. They had discovered a human body.
Like a whole one? Or just a hand at this point?
At this point, it's just the hand and the arm.
And how big's the box?
It's like a TV-size box.
Okay, so it could contain a whole person?
This week, we are traveling back to the mid-1990s, New York City to be precise, which was the era where fame, excess, and outrageous self-expression were woven into the very fabric of the city's culture. And at the heart of it was a subculture of young, eccentric partygoers who had emerged out of the previous party era and called themselves the club kids of New York City. Do you know anything about who they are?
So the club kids, I do. I've seen on Drag Race where they dress up. It's punky. It's kind of art. It's, yeah. Although I thought it was earlier than the 90s.
So it's really interesting because there's a transitional period between the celebutants that came before the club kids and the club kids emerging. There is a kind of grey area where there's an overlap between these two genres. But by the 1990s, there was very much a very defined kind of new subculture called the club kids of New York City. And we'll explain exactly how kind of they became the club kids and what kind of era they emerged from. But the club kids of New York pretty much dominated the nightlife in the late 1980s and the 1990s. And they defined everything from the fashion, the music, even the drugs that were cool at the time. They caused such a stir that the tabloids followed their every move, and in doing so, they became the stuff of suburban parents' nightmares, fueling that fear of not knowing what your kids were getting up to, while simultaneously luring millions of teenagers to New York City to get a piece of the action.
I don't think they were dangerous or anything. They're just like party goers. They're out. They dress a certain way, a bit of a following, but they're kind of harmless. They're just regular teenagers.
I'm not saying they're all going around murdering people and stuffing inside boxes.
What you said.
Just one body. At this point in history, though, New York had already gone through countless party eras, like shifting in these oscillating waves with each passing decade. And so today's story begins at that transitional point between the rock and disco eras that define like the 60s and the 70s into the electronic dance and rave eras of the 80s and the 90s. Up until this point, clubs like Studio 54, have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Studio 54 pretty much was led by the party icons of the 80s like Andy Warhol and his famous factory of celebrities containing like artists, musicians, and various socialites, and were the reason that people had for going out on a Friday night.
People just don't go out.
They don't, not anymore, not since lockdown, unfortunately. There was social status in being seen mingling with these people that were known as the celebutants back in the day. But in the early 80s, the AIDS epidemic began ravishing the city, turning the nightlife into a bit of a ghost town. But then eventually the scene was handed a final blow when the king of Clubland himself, Andy Warhol, died in 1987, leaving a gaping void in its leadership ready to be filled by someone raw and new. This is when Michael Alig, an outrageous up-and-coming little gay boy from small-town Indiana, brazenly decided to take the seat at the empty throne left by Andy Warhol, proclaiming himself as the prince of the New York nightclub scene. And Michael Alig managed to successfully revive the club scene and transition it into this new era of electro dance and techno, defining what we now know as the club kids today, giving us huge celebrities like RuPaul, Lady Bunny, and of course Amanda Lepore. Any of those names ring a bell?
Oh yeah, RuPaul and Lady Bunny.
Mm-hmm. Do you know much about Amanda Lepore?
Is she the one with this kind of weird cartoon face painted on her? A bit like, what's that cartoon character all the guys fancied her when they were like growing up?
Is it the one from Roger Rabbit?
Yeah.
What's her name again? Oh my God, I can't remember.
Yeah, but that's who she reminds me of.
Yes, very much a choice in the look. Like, she kind of makes plastic surgery look pretty damn cool, right?
Yeah, a lot of her is pretty new, considering she's probably, 60?
Pretty new. I don't think she's alive anymore. I think she's now passed away.
Oh, right. And like, she must be, half of her's like made in China, right?
Pretty much. Shipped in FedEx boxes. At their peak, they were literally everywhere. So it's really funny to watch these old reruns of the talk shows that they would appear on. And in the early shows, you would see like RuPaul there, and she's just super young. She's super timid. She's just sitting there quietly amongst all the other club kids. But then in the later episodes, she is literally the front and center. It's just amazing to see kind of that transition in her confidence over time, to the point that she has become the superstar that we know and love today.
Supermodel of the world.
She is the supermodel of the world.
Yeah, she's just got it in terms of
she has
star power and kind of the way that she presents herself. Although back in the 90s, she didn't obviously have a stylist and the same kind of wigs going around. Some of her wigs were thirsty back then.
They were, but Adam, everything that they did was all on a kind of a shoestring budget.
Oh yeah, of course.
And
yeah.
It's pretty incredible considering that they didn't have access to some of the cosmetics that young people have today. They would just find things in the streets.
Oh yeah, everything was off the rack. But it's weird how it's completely different to what you look at the drag scene now versus back then.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But something
it's
really,
so refined now, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Instagram ready.
Whereas that was quite raw and just ready.
And even though this Michael Alig guy was adored across his playground that he helped build, there was a really dark side to him. His drug addiction would eventually cause him to spiral downward, leading to one of the most notorious murders of this period, marking the ultimate downfall of this subculture, the club kids that he helped create. So Adam, today, I'm going to be telling you the wild story of Michael Alig, the prince of the club kids, the stuff they did, the celebrities it produced, and how the movement ended up turning into something unimaginably sinister with the murder of fellow club kid Angel Melendez. Today, we're exploring that razor-thin line between creativity, chaos, brilliance, and madness.
Really thin line.
Very thin line. Do you know much about New York in the 1980s?
That, apart from like the AIDS crisis and things like that, it was quite dangerous, wasn't it, back then?
Yes, extremely dangerous.
Not because of AIDS, but just because of like crime and everything like that.
I mean, one would argue at a time when AIDS is brand new and ravishing the city, I would argue that's pretty damn dangerous.
Yeah, what I meant was like it wasn't going out mugging people.
No, why?
Yeah, there were a lot of crime and criminals and a drug problem. I think, am I right in thinking that?
Exactly. I mean, this point in the 1980s, New York City was an apocalyptic Wild West marked by urban decay. There was rising crime, deep social turmoil was plaguing the city. Neighborhoods, especially like places like the Bronx, were crumbling, with as many as 70% of white residents moving out to the suburbs. And this was kind of termed like kind of white flight at the time. And across the city, crime was soaring. By 1990, there were over 2,000 homicides being reported per year. Literally everywhere you went, there were crushed crack vials on the sidewalks. Times Square was famously called the sleaziest block in America, packed with sex shops, peep shows, adult theaters. Instead of obviously advertising M&Ms and Nike on the iconic billboards, it featured porn shows and massage parlors.
Really? I had no idea it was that kind of
It
area.
was so run down. Yeah, completely. But this was also a time of bustling creativity, with graffiti artists like Keith Haring turning the city walls and subways into these vibrant canvases, bringing his work into the mainstream. You've most definitely seen his iconic sort of morph men figures in bright colors on t-shirts. Even today, I think you'll see them everywhere. And I think they may have even inspired the morph suit.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like the pink, yellow, blue men look like they're dancing.
Yeah, and a lot of people try to emulate that in restaurants, cool restaurants and bars and kind of pizza parlors and things like that. You'll see these iconic kind of figurines just splattered all over the wall. And that's pretty much what he was really famous for. But when it came to the nightclub scene, one of the key epicenters of the city was called Studio 54, which was dominated by the Celebutons, which was a mix of wealthy Manhattan socialites and celebrities like Eliza Minnelli, Debbie Harry, and even Salvador Dali. And this was all pretty much led by the original It Boy himself, Andy Warhol, who was a huge artist in the 1960s, whose works included, do you know the famous Campbell soup cans?
Yeah.
And big old paintings. He also did the Marilyn Monroe and the Elvis silk screens. Do you know there's like pop arty kind of silk screens of Marilyn Monroe's face, and there'll be like 4 of them in a grid, all brightly coloured, etc.
That was him.
Yeah, he was responsible for those. And so pretty much the epicenter of this celebrity nightlife was Studio 54. But there were other clubs. They just weren't as well known or anywhere near as exclusive as Studio 54. So the partygoers who perhaps weren't in the in crowd or weren't celebrities were sort of kind of shunned by the elitist celebutons of Studio 54. But they did have a home, and that was typically at clubs like Danceteria, which at the time was considered one of the epicenters of new wave music in New York City. These are the clubs that kind of birthed Baby Madonna, because that's where she worked in her early career. She was a coat-checking girl. There was also Run DMC, the Beastie Boys, the Smiths, Cyndi Lauper. This was pretty much the club where all the alternative cool kids went.
There's quite an eclectic bunch of people, Run DMC, and then you've got Cyndi Lauper.
Mm-hmm. At this point in time as well, hip-hop was also really exploding. And it's kind of that era of time when it really began to emerge into the mainstream. And it was clubs like The Tunnel and Danceteria that gave these really big artists from all these different genres that start in their career. And this whole dynamic between Studio 54 being kind of the elitist club, and then you've got Danceteria and Tunnel and places like that, was a bit like Norwich before lockdown. We had like Mercy, which was the big commercialized club where all the really preened fake tan people would go. And it was really difficult to get in. But if you then walk around the corner, you'll find places like Cube or The Loft that house the alternative crowds. So this is the dynamic that really existed between Studio 54 and these other clubs like Danceteria. And at Danceteria, one of the busboys working there was a college kid named Michael Alig. And he was born in tiny South Bend of Indiana. He was this preppy looking kid, very camp, totally charming, very energetic, but also a raging attention-seeking queen. You know the type.
I mean, yeah, I live with one.
Where he grew up in South Bend, Indiana, the city was pretty much an industrial town filled with car makers and really small town values. So being gay in this environment was really tough. And as a result, Michael was bullied mercilessly. But he was a brilliant student. He graduated in the top 8% of his class. At school, he wrote a little gossip column for the school newspaper, and he learned to hustle by getting his mum to drive him to Aldi, where he would buy a truckload of sweets. He would mark them all up by 300% and sell them to all the kids at school. And so, throughout school, he was known as the Candyman.
Isn't the Candyman isn't that like a horror movie?
Is that the one of the bees where if you say Candyman in the mirror like a bunch of times, then the mirror explodes and you get stung by bees?
I don't know, is it?
I think so. It was like Denzel Washington or something like that in that.
I don't know. It rings a bell. There is one where you shouldn't say the name 3 times.
Isn't that like Bloody Mary?
Oh, I don't know. Wasn't that what you do when you want to divorce someone? I divorce you. Wasn't that scene in EastEnders? Their family.
Oh, yeah, that Muslim family. And apparently the way that you could get divorced was by the husband saying, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. And while he's saying it, he gets like the second I divorce you. And she starts freaking out like, don't say it. Don't do it. I'm like, what is happening right now?
As if, it's odd that's what does it.
Legally, though, I don't think it stands up. You're still married.
You coughed on that 3rd time. That wasn't a full 3 times.
But of course, as every young, gay, bullied kid does living in a small town of middle America, as soon as Michael turned 18, he decided that he wanted to get the hell out of South Bend. At the time, if you were kind of artistic or different or even queer, your choices were basically New York City or Los Angeles. Michael chooses New York City, and so he enrolls at Fordham University in the Bronx to study architecture. And when he arrives in the city, he quickly finds his tribe, and they weren't architecture students. The people he connected with the most were the downtown fashion student kind of kids. Mm-hmm. And so he changes his course. He enrolls in the Fashion Institute of Technology in Lower Manhattan. He finds an apartment in St. Mark's Place in the East Village, which he describes as intoxicating, decadent, and a dilapidated carnival. Which
is that good or bad? I don't know. Sounds fun, but dilapidated?
But at the same time, like this is New York in the 80s, so it's going to be pretty damn dangerous as well. So I don't know. Of course, with no chance of him getting into the in crowd at Studio 54, the place kids like him went were Danceteria, which was this 12-story kind of building in the Flatiron district, and it was owned by this guy called Rudolf Piper, who is the first of our club owners who we will meet, who is straight up a German Bond villain. He's like super svelte, he's really skinny, he's sexy like a snake, always dressed in black, and he is just an absolute machine in the club district. And he would book these insanely wild acts like Hennessy Brown, who was famous for her act where she would literally squirt breast milk into the crowd.
Ew. Why?
I don't know. It's because for the shock value, I guess.
Does she have to prep for that?
What do you mean? Have a baby?
Yeah, how can you just do
My breast
that?
milk's ran out. Oh, I need to have another baby, probably. But she also had a knack for reaching into her vagina and pulling out magician's handkerchiefs. And apparently, her record was 100, bits of tissue.
I don't think that's a good place to store it.
No.
Especially because the thing is, if you've got a cold and she reaches in there and hands you a tissue, you're like, I'm not blowing my nose with that.
Yeah, no thanks. I will just sneeze into my sleeve. But I think she's missed a trick there with the name Hennessy Brown.
What's that?
But she should have been called Tissue Box. Because that's how I imagine it. You pluck a tissue out.
And 100?
I know.
I mean, and 2, who's counting? Is it someone, when you walk into a museum and there's someone with a little stopwatchy thing counting? Is someone doing that?
They probably made a game of that at some point. Probably. She probably came on and announced that she's got a new world record, and they probably counted each one.
1, 2, 3. We're going to be here a while.
Rudolph would also book acts like the Missing Foundation, who famously didn't play any instruments. Instead, they would play with various things that they would find lying around on the streets, like old metal oil drums or lead pipes. They would also then throw barbed wire onto the stage and just roll around in it naked. So it's pretty extreme. That was the point of these acts. They were meant to shock and be really extreme in nature. Other acts included a guy who would literally lift kegs of beer using his piercings from his ears and his nipples.
Eesh.
So it's really wild stuff. And this was the alternative scene. Like, things were way more extreme than the mainstream, more commercialized clubs like Studio 54, which is all about glitz and glamour and kind of get a bottle of volley on the table and get some Moet champagne. And this was as gritty as it got, essentially.
I always used to like a grungy club, so I think I probably would have fitted in there.
Do you think?
I don't know if I want to see that, but it sounds like my kind of place.
Especially the nipple stuff. I wouldn't want to see the vagina tissue box. Maybe.
Really? I don't know. If it was on.
Do you remember when we went to Latitude Festival and we went into that tent and there was that act who just kept showing us their vagina?
Was that before or after they were chased around by someone in a Mr. Blobby costume?
I think I might have missed that. What happened there?
Okay. There was a guy dressed as Mr. Blobby, and I'm pretty sure he was chasing someone and was stripping them. It was very odd for Latitude Festival, which is a family festival.
As middle class as you can get when it comes to festivals, and they had this naked person with their vagina out and being chased by Mr. Blobby.
Yes.
Which I clearly missed.
But it was after 11 o'clock, so kids are in bed.
Yeah, exactly. They're
and Mr.
nicely
Blobby,
wrapped up in their little tents.
Mr. Blobby's chilling out.
Who would have thought that Mr. Blobby had a darker side?
I know, right?
So when Michael starts coming to Danceteria, he is totally in his element. He was performing these little talent shows that the club would hold. He would do his little kind of go-go dancing routine. And he was most definitely the club twink. And after a few months of partying, he ends up getting into this routine where he's literally partying all night, sleeping all day. He starts missing a bunch of his classes. And so it wasn't long before he decided to drop out of college and got a job bussing tables at the club. At some point during the 1980s, Michael pitches an idea to Rudolph to let him host a filthy mouth contest, which was basically, if you're familiar with Paris is Burning and RuPaul's revival of it, it's a contest where contestants would be invited onto stage. They would throw shade at the people in the crowd.
It's a bit, not quite like a roast, but you're just throwing like comebacks at each other.
I think so. So it's a bit like The Library is Open on RuPaul's Drag Race. And Michael says it would very often end up devolving into public masturbation with beer bottles.
What? With beer bottles?
I know. How do you go from throwing shade to having a wank with a beer bottle?
Who do I want to know?
So Michael, he throws these filthy mouth contests. They are a massive success and they become like a regular thing. And each time he hosts one of these events, he gets like paid $500. It's from here that Michael pitches more and more ideas to Rudolph, who eventually agrees to let him promote his own party as a club promoter. His first really big party night was called Consumer Hell, where he arranged to steal a bunch of shopping trolleys from a supermarket in New Jersey, which they then wheeled to Manhattan on the subway 2 at a time. In the club, he would have all these TV adverts just looping over and over on the screens in every single room. And the dress code was pretty much to wear anything that you could essentially buy at a supermarket. So people literally arrived in these really creative outfits, like saran wrap dresses, stuff with kind of Cheerios and Fluffernutters between the layers. Michael's outfit was made of junk food boxes. He wore an Oreo hat with earrings made of Fruit Loops. So really creative stuff that he was coming up with.
I'd like to make an outfit out of food. And then that way you wouldn't be hungry that night. You haven't got to go to the kebab shop afterwards.
But you might be naked by the end of the night.
You might be because someone's like pinching a chip off your back.
I would not be pinching a club where everyone's farting and you're sweating and you probably got like drink spilled on you. I would not be stealing a chip from someone's outfit from their back.
I think it'd be great. Or and then you'd have a mayonnaise as a bra. So you're like dipping in the chips and your mayonnaise and you're just there. Everyone's having fun and you're crying because, I don't know, you've been stitched up or whatever. Someone's dumped you. Your girlfriends hate you.
Yeah, you could just sit on the floor and sob while you eat your chips. Yeah, that sounds like exactly the thing that the club kids would be into. And again, this was a raging success where he was now routinely getting paid $5,000 for every party that he threw. And he was just getting started. But by 1987, Andy Warhol, the king of the subculture at the time, he dies, and it is a massive blow to the club scene. Journalists were describing this as the literal death of downtown. Like, it was already struggling due to all the crime and the white residents that were leaving in droves. But on top of this, the AIDS epidemic had already done its worst. At the time, remember, people didn't really know a lot about AIDS or how you could even catch it. So it was just easier for people to stay away. But when Andy Warhol died, it was kind of like the final blow. All the celebrities that kind of hovered around him just decided to leave. And that kind of solidified this notion of the death of downtown. That's how big this guy was in terms of, he's like basically like Monica from Friends. If it wasn't for Monica, none of them would be friends. She's the original hostess. She brings everyone together, essentially.
Got you.
And so deciding to seize the opportunity, consciously or subconsciously, Michael starts making moves to fill that void that was left by Andy Warhol. And people describe him as baby Godzilla, just storming around the club in literal roller skates and a tiny kind of sequin mini dress. And honestly, at first, especially to the old Andy Warhol celebutants that were still around, they just did not like this at all. Because under Andy Warhol, it was all about glitz and glamour. It was about celebrity and the trust funds. It was sleazy, but it was alluring. Page 6 was always filled with kind of the celebutants and what they were up to. In fact, the term superstar was made popular under Andy Warhol, really bringing that term into the mainstream to the point that it's now commonly used today. But he also famously coined the phrase 15 minutes of fame. Do you know the saying?
Yeah. How did that come about? Because people were in the club, they'd have their moment and then they'd go home?
Well, the thing is, though, like as a celebutant superstar, you could just be famous for essentially being famous, being seen in those circles. And so because of that, all these page 6 publications and these kind of gossip columns, they would report on you and you would get noticed. You would be snapped in these kind of magazines and things like that. And you would essentially become famous. And that's where that term got coined.
Ah, no way.
So when Michael Alig burst onto the scene, he was tacky, he was over the top, and many people just didn't like it. But the truth was Michael and the club kids, they were deliberately parodying and mocking the celebutants for their excess and their attention-seeking behavior that had made them so famous.
Mm-hmm.
So when the club kids would dress up, it was on the same level, but instead of kind of jewel dresses, it would be literal bottle caps.
And this is where they would just wear really out there, I don't know, art type clothes, I guess, really, rather
just
than
anything that you could make. Yeah. So they wanted to give this illusion of this success and this grandeur and this kind of opulence, but it was all made with literal saran wrap and fluffernutters.
And that's why it's quite punky in a way, I always think.
Yes. I mean, there are kind of crossovers between the different genres that are emerging at the time. Punk was definitely a thing, but it's merging with the old disco crew and the new wave music, and you've got the punk and you've got the rock, and this kind of all amalgamating, kind of creating these little mini kind of subgenres. And instead of changing their names to famous celebutant style names like Candy Darling or Ultraviolet, they would literally call themselves Genitalia or Cynthia Socialize. And these were kind of the start of those iconic drag names starting to kind of surface. And it all started as a way of parodying these elitist Warhol kind of celebutants that dominated the party scene for so many years.
Genitalia.
Oh, did you not get that?
No, initially I thought that's a weird name, but now I get it, yeah.
And before long, Michael's entourage, they start growing. He has a small group of equally outrageous friends who, without fail, would show up to the clubs wearing kind of space hats, feathered kind of leotard thongs, all in the same outfit.
Nice.
Yeah, very sexy. The collapse of the party scene under Warhol doesn't really recover as much as it instead starts to attract a whole new generation with kind of different values, but also a generation that hadn't been ravaged by kind of the AIDS epidemic. So there was kind of less fear.
A bit more freedom out there.
Yeah, there was a lot more education when it came to AIDS. By this point, people knew how to catch it. They also knew, more importantly,
how to protect
themselves.
Yeah.
Right? So it didn't really have the same effect on this new generation of partygoers that were coming into the scene as it did the ones that were like surprised by the AIDS epidemic. But also the really unexpected thing that really helped to attract this new generation of partygoers to the scene was that in 1985, the minimum drinking age in New York City was raised from 19 to 21. And the aim was to curb antisocial behavior amongst teenagers, but bizarrely it backfires because even more teens start going out to the clubs in droves. It sort of becomes super chic to have underage kids in your club. And because the drinking age was set at the federal level at this point, the state police didn't really care much. They kind of sort of turned a blind eye to it. It's like that thing that kids always do. Like you make something forbidden and it just becomes more appealing.
That'd be really annoying. Say that you've just turned 19. You're like, great, I can go out drinking. And they bring this in and you're like, here we go again.
Yeah, but then you would even be more chic because now you're going out drinking, but it's also forbidden to be drinking. That's what makes it so chic.
Yeah, I imagine that being really weird because you'd be like, last month I could do this legally, but now you need to go back to having fake ID.
Exactly. And by this point, Michael is no longer just appearing in the periphery of photographs on page 6. Very often kind of spreads are now actually about him specifically and his friends, to the dismay of kind of the dwindling celebutants that are like now aging and like going off to retire at like the age of 40. I guess once you get to 40, like you're too old to be partying and stuff, right? So you just go off and die.
40? More like 30. So one question, what is page 6? You made it sound like that was quite significant.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's like the gossipy kind of salacious section of the newspaper about what's happening in the nightlife and who's doing what, who's wearing what fashion shows are happening at the time, what the celebrities are doing. So it's through these publications on page 6, a journalist and a scene commentator starts referring to Michael and his friends as the Club Kids, which they end up loving so much that this is what they end up calling themselves. And that is how the Club Kids were born. That's how they got their name, because they didn't really have an identity before. They were just these weird young kids who were really kind of incensed by being excluded from the Celebiton Studio 54 crew. They started parodying them. They create their own subculture. People start writing about them, and bam, they've got a name, the Club Kids of New York City. And that's how it was born.
It's quite a nice name, really. I feel like they're just young people that go to the club and they're kids.
The name's on the tin, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's not that sophisticated, actually.
And of course, their aesthetic was theatrical. It was cartoonish. It was anti-fashion and mocking. Michael literally describes it as part drag, part clown, part infantilism. And here's the funny thing. In their pursuit of parodying and mocking the celebrity-obsessed old guard of the Andy Warhol Celebitons, they inevitably become exactly that, because they start getting really desperate to be in the limelight even more. So they essentially become the very thing that they once opposed.
I wonder if they realized that, or whether they were like, no, we're not like that. We're different.
They did realize it. Michael is on record as saying that exact line, that we pretty much became the thing that we were opposing.
Oh, right, okay.
So they definitely had that self-realization.
I wonder if they're like, do you know what? This is actually really fun. It is really fun being famous. I like it. I'm going to carry on.
Yeah, essentially. Michael's big break eventually comes in the late 1980s with a man called Peter Gatien, who just a few years back in 1982 purchases the infamous Limelight Club. Have you heard of that before?
No, never heard of that one.
Well, if you've ever watched any film that's set in New York, this is the club that is based on, essentially.
Okay.
And Peter Gatien is actually the second of our club owners that looks exactly like a Bond villain, in that he wears a fucking eye patch.
Well, yeah, that will do it.
He's originally from Canada, and growing up he lost an eye playing hockey, and eventually gets a huge injury settlement, which he uses to open up a rock bar in Canada before moving to the USA, where he opens up a disco in Miami and Atlanta before finally coming to New York City. By this point, he was starting to sense that disco had kind of sort of run its course, so he wanted to try something brand new. He finds this old church up for sale. It's the Episcopal Church of the Holy Communion, which is like this 120-year-old building in Chelsea. He pays top dollar for it, like $1.7 million, and then he spends another $5 million renovating the inside with loads of multi-tier balconies under this huge vaulted ceiling. He builds like a VIP lounge, and throughout the club, there are loads of like hanging cages that descend down from the ceiling for dancers to dance in. That's where the original go-go dancers will be dancing.
Actually going to be in cages, yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty elaborate. He's got some money then.
That is it. This is an elaborate club. And so if you've ever seen any New York clubs depicted in the movies, this is what that is based on. It's just iconic. The club opens in 1982, and by 1988, Peter Gatien is running a fairly successful business operation. But it's different in that it's just not cool. It's just iconic. Like, the Limelight has become this massive tourist trap where people want to come and see this incredible club inside this 120-year-old church that's owned by this very shadowy, very alluring kind of persona that appears on like page 6 and things like that. And Peter is a workhorse. He will regularly work 18 hours a day. He's always at his clubs. He's always lurking in the background, which is very strange for a club owner. Normally they're very hands-off and they'll be like away on their yacht or whatever. He's always working. And he doesn't drink and he doesn't take drugs, except for twice a year, where he'll go on these week-long coke-fueled orgies. And then, when that was all done, he would just be right back to being sober again, back at the clubs working 18 hours.
I like that's how he unwound. He just takes coke for a week. And
just get it all out your system, you know?
That's it. I guess it allows him to keep focused. He's not tempted at the weekends. You know, he's running a business.
Exactly. And at some point, when he was struggling to fill one of the rooms in the club, he tentatively asked Michael if he would be interested in doing something there. Michael's not sure. His friends are like, are you sure? It's not like really a cool club or anything like that. But he ums and ahs for a bit, and then he finally decides that he is going to throw a sexy astronaut party.
An astronaut party.
And it's a huge hit. So Peter gives him an entire night to himself. And it is Wednesday nights at the Limelight for him to do whatever he wants. And so Disco 2000 is born.
Okay.
They rent out a full set of animal mascot costumes under fake names so they don't have to return them. So it's quite smart. They have costumes like Claire the chicken, Icy the bear, Uric the dog, and amongst others. So basically, these aren't like sexy little chicken outfits. This is a full-blown fur-covered outfit that you would have someone selling hot dogs on the street.
One, why? And two, this isn't where furring came from, is it?
I wouldn't be surprised. Another subculture born from the club kids in New York City. They would basically come in, they would hype up the crowd, they would vogue, they would roam the club dressed as these animals. Claire the chicken.
Where?
Claire the chicken. She sort of had this trapeze swing over the dance floor where she would pretty much just swing for hours, dressed up as this chicken.
Did she cluck?
Probably.
She's got to do that for like several hours, and like they're all having fun, and she's just keeps on swinging back and forth.
James St. James, who's a very good friend of Michael's, he used to be kind of part of the old guard. He was a celebutant just when he was kind of young enough to still be able to straddle between the two like scenes. Mm-hmm. So he was easily welcomed into kind of the club kids of New York City. He was there that night as well. And he was the drug child, where he wore this long wig in a slightly little outfit, and he would just sit in a cage surrounded by signs that says, "Do not feed the drug child." And then he would rattle on the bars begging people to give him a bump of coke.
This is so weird.
And again, it was a smash hit. So every Wednesday, it was a different take on Disco 2000. The shopping trolleys made a reappearance this time. He invited his German immigrant mum to visit, and you see her getting pushed around the club in these trolleys, essentially.
I love how you said that the shopping trolleys made a reappearance. They were like this iconic thing that... Like, what?
He went through a lot of effort to get those. He's not going to give them up.
Is Walmart not calling him up and going, "Can we have our trolleys back, please?"
I think it was like an A&P in New Jersey or something like that.
Okay.
He would bring in bales of hay and live chickens, literally live chickens. At one point, he had built an indoor water slide, which, of course, couldn't have been very safe with all the electricity.
I was going to say, yeah, that and the chickens, they're going to pop that thing. I don't know what's going on.
Another time, he made a literal Ferris wheel, offering clubgoers free rides, completely smashed out their faces in the club.
I'm not getting on that thing.
No, but yeah, apparently it was a smash hit. Everywhere you looked, there were people having sex just in the open. And very quickly they realized that the parties that did really well typically had this element of sex to them. So one of the dress trends for a while was literally cut out the bottom portion of your outfit and wear no underwear.
Oh, I mean,
Sexy.
It's, you haven't got to like strip down. You're there, ready to go.
It's a new take on chaps.
This sounds really... Okay, when I said I like a grungy club, not this.
And it gets way worse. Throughout the evening, they would host these little events, and the most popular of these would be called the Hot Body Contest, where they would hype up the crowd until people got on stage, stripped completely naked, and the hottest body or the performance would win $50.
$50, is that all?
To be fair, at this point, it's not really about the money.
Okay.
Honestly, it's just about having a good time.
I would hate to be the cleaner that comes in at 7 a.m. the next day and I'd be like, ugh.
Wiping wads of spunk off the walls.
Wads of spunk is not a phrase that we need to...
And of course, the music was dance and techno. So the Limelight becomes the sort of ground zero for the rave culture that's bustling into the mainstream at this point. What is interesting is at this point, especially for Michael, drugs aren't really a thing. In the clubs, it was mostly just weed and cocaine anyway, which of course had been around for generations, but it was all just done on the down low. But then a new drug hits the scene. It's called ecstasy.
Ecstasy.
She's a slut and she knows it. She wants to rule all the boys. She can't help taking the drugs on a Saturday night. What was that from? What was the name of the show?
Summer High Tide.
Summer High Tide, that's it. He is iconic. Chris Lilly, was it?
Yeah, it's a good show.
So ecstasy is now a thing. And believe it or not, it was completely legal at the time. In fact, it would remain legal until 1996.
Really?
Yeah.
What, just in the US?
So if you got busted with it, the worst that the cops would do would just take it off you and throw it in the bin. But I imagine, like, if that was me, 5 minutes later...
You'd be in the bin.
I'd be in that bin rummaging around. And so because of this, ecstasy was kind of sort of done very much out in the open. They start making these ecstasy punches, basically involving crushing up a bunch of ecstasy, mixing it into like a 55-gallon drum of punch and serving it from the DJ booth.
Ugh.
At one point, they organized this sort of hole in the wall where you'd hand over like $15 and someone would just hand you over like a rocks glass filled with champagne, vodka, and crushed magic mushrooms. These people are getting fucked up. It's a bit like in Florence where you'd pay like a couple euros, you put your hand in the wall, in kind of the side of the building, and then someone would hand you like a glass of wine. It's like that, but in a club, and it's magic mushrooms and vodka and champagne.
Yeah, if I'm in a club and someone's handing me a drink through a wall,
I'm not taking
that.
But that's the thing, because nobody's really cracking down on the ecstasy use, they start getting really brazen with all of the drugs. And they would play this game on stage called What's My Line, where they would literally rack up various lines of white drugs on the table, like crystal meth, cocaine, ecstasy, or ketamine. And then people were invited up on stage to snort one of them and guess what it was. And if you guessed correctly, you got to snort another one. And then the winner would be the one who would be able to guess them all correctly.
That is, I mean...
so dangerous!
So dangerous. Yeah, what? Mixing drugs. I thought you were going to say they were only allowed to snort one at a time. I thought, that's really responsible. I'm glad they kind of said, like, just keep to one drug. No.
Oh, no. It was all about trying as many drugs as you possibly could. So they start handing out ecstasy as party favors as well. That was Michael's thing. He would walk around the club. If you saw someone not having a good time, he would approach him and say, open up, and he would slip a pill in your mouth. But remember, Michael at this point is completely anti-drugs, but he would pretend like he was really fucked up. He would stage falling over, or he would cut himself on purpose and say that he fell over, or he would see like a busboy coming and then deliberately fall into them. So everything was just built on extremes and chaos. And he was always thinking about what the next extreme thing that he could do. This is when he starts throwing what he called the outlaw parties. They would orchestrate these flash mobs and would basically cram themselves, like 200-300 partygoers in one go, into like a grocery store or a bank vestibule with a boombox, and they would just rave it up. The most famous of these was in a McDonald's in Times Square, where they literally would all jam into these kind of restaurants. All the other punters that are currently in the McDonald's at the time are freaking out. The owner's calling the police, and at the same time, he's ordering 100 cheeseburgers and he's just throwing them out into the crowd.
So he's just taking over the restaurant or whatever store.
That is it. He would also break into like old abandoned warehouses. One time they stole a bus and they held a party in a bus.
How was he not arrested more?
The point of these parties was to obviously attract attention. And of course, the police very often would be called, and within 15 minutes, they would be there to shut down the party. And that was the whole point. It was mission accomplished. He wanted to attract attention, because what this ended up doing was fueling his image in the papers and then again attracting more attention. They would also hold these kind of outlaw fashion shows between train station platforms, perfectly timed, just at the point that two trains were kind of either side for maximum kind of exposure. And people are just looking out the window going, what's going on here? What's this all about? And then they'll read about it in page 6 and they'll be like, oh yeah, we saw them. And that's just one way that their profile would elevate. And by this point, the club kids are just national spectacles. They're invited to attend MTV. They're in all the magazines and the talk shows like Grinaldo and Joan Rivers. Of course, the talk show's objectives were to fuel the fears of parents that their kids were kind of running off to New York City and starting to OD on all these kind of weird, fantastical drugs that were breaking out into the scene at the time, like ecstasy. But at the same time, watching at home alongside those terrified parents were their kids going, yeah, I want that life for me.
Yeah, that looks fun. I want to go do that.
So these talk shows think that they're doing something noble, but really what they're doing is they're just encouraging more kids to just run away to New York.
It's like promo for the club kids.
100%. Michael is essentially the Pied Piper, and his flute is the drugs and all the parties that he's throwing. By the early 1990s, Peter Gatien has a monopoly on all the big New York clubs like Palladium, Tunnel, Club USA. The Tunnel, for instance, is this old railroad freight terminal from the days when trains would go straight up to the warehouse where you'd offload all your cargo onto. My favorite detail about the Tunnel Club is that the bathrooms would span like 50 stalls long, and there would be a DJ booth at either side that was dubbed the Poop DJ.
The Poop DJ. I reckon that's where you probably start out, isn't it? If you're a DJ in New York at the time, your first gig, I'm the Poop DJ.
Yeah, why not?
Like blasting out some tunes while people are taking a shit.
Yeah. At Peter's height, his clubs were raking in $600,000 a week from all of his clubs, and it was all because of Michael.
Wow, that is a lot.
It's around about this time that Michael finally falls victim to drugs, and it's just because it's impossible for him to escape from them. He starts, of course, with ecstasy, and then for a while, his favorite then becomes ketamine, then crystal meth, then acid, then mushrooms. He pretty much kind of goes through them all. At one point, he would blow up these balloons filled with like 50 ecstasy pills and then just release them over the dance floor, and then people would literally just fight over these balloons like fucking animals just to get what's inside of them.
I'm surprised they would... I'm guessing the cost of ecstasy back then would have been pretty cheap, because they just seem to be giving it away
willy-nilly.
Yeah.
And I think it's a synthetic drug anyway, so you can just make it in a lab and mass produce it. And when you were out partying, the purpose was to take as many drugs as you possibly could, like to try them all, not just like, I'm going to stick with ecstasy tonight. It was like, I want ecstasy, I want Xanax, I want Rohypnol, I want them all at the same time. And popular at the time was these pre-mixed combos called ZAC, which basically contained Xanax, ecstasy, crystal meth, and ketamine, which you would take all at once and you would just completely lose your mind. And it's so funny to me because ketamine and Xanax are sedatives. So the opposite of what you'd want to take at a rave.
Yeah, I just don't understand how people survived with that kind of amount of drugs.
I would be dead.
Yeah.
And like I said, Michael at this point was really hot on ketamine. And I guess he would run out from time to time. So to get a supply of ketamine, he would buy cat medication in liquid form, and he and James would pour it onto a baking tray until it kind of like crystallized. So there's these really funny video montages of them constantly just checking the oven to see if it was ready, and then when it was, they would then crush it up and then just snort it.
The fact that they resorted to that just shows, I don't know,
The spiral.
Yeah, that is not a good state to be in.
Of course, when ketamine stops being exciting, they then switch to harder drugs, and eventually they arrive at heroin. And so all of a sudden, it went from all these kids jumping around frantically in the clubs to just staring at the ground in a daze. It's really sad.
That doesn't sound fun.
It doesn't. Michael starts falling into a drug cycle and he starts missing very, very important business meetings. And when he does show up, he's literally just in a bedsheet. He just has no shame. He doesn't care. He says that once he was out shopping in a supermarket and he was in a major K-hole, he accidentally bumps into someone's shopping cart. Turns out the guy was someone from the club. He sees that Michael is in a major K-hole and he just gives him a bump of cocaine right there in the A&P supermarket.
This will sort you out.
Yeah, it just helps him snap out of it. From there, he'll make his way to the eggs. He'll see another guy from the club and then bam, he gets another hit of whatever else he's got on him.
It feels like a seesaw, very much a yo-yo. You take this and then you go too much. Then you take this other thing to an upper, then a downer.
He has this really weird obsession with piss and poop that he starts to literally pay people to drink their own piss on stage.
Oh.
He would also sometimes pee on people from the balcony above. One time he pees down on a new bartender who's just started and she is fucking furious. She immediately reports him to Peter Gatien and Peter fires her because, of course, Michael is his golden boy, right?
Yeah.
He also starts tricking people into drinking pee as well and also sometimes their own vomit. There's this one drag queen called Ernie and he would just hand her a Gatorade bottle and she'd drink it and everyone would laugh and he'd be like, oh no, what's in here?
This is disgusting. It's not this is just not nice.
To be fair, I mean, that happens time and time again. So if you're repeatedly getting tricked into drinking piss,
Yeah, like,
do you really have sympathy for that person?
I mean, that's like the 10th time today.
I'm starting to think he secretly likes it. And so Michael also starts to employ his own acts as well. One of the most popular acts that he employs is a woman called Ida Slapper. She's wildly popular because she would get on stage dressed as like Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror.
Oh,
The drag queen.
right. I thought like you were like a Frankfurter.
Do you want to guess what her act was?
She slapped people.
No. She would basically give herself a champagne enema on stage.
Oh my God.
Then she would point her ass at the crowd and then spray everyone with it.
Why are people going to this place?
I know, it's so rank.
I would need to be like dipped in bleach after this.
100%. One of Michael's gnarliest parties was called Blood Feast, basically inspired by his obsession with horror movies. And basically, he would buy bags and bags of brains and liver from a butcher. He would retrofit these coffins, taking off the lid and replace them with a clear perspex panel so that everyone could see inside them. And then he would get his club kids to lay in them, covered in mashed up brains, liver and blood. And they would just all be dotted around the actual club itself so people could just come along and marvel at it. And everything would just be really dark and moody, loads of red lighting and stuff. A bit horror movie-esque.
This is surreal.
It is surreal. James talks about how at the end of the night, he couldn't stop gagging from the putrid smell that had started to develop in his little coffin. But he says it was all about the experience.
What experience? I'm sorry.
At this point, Michael is a fucking dirty bastard. He is so riddled with hepatitis, so it's no surprise there, that he makes a game out of spreading it around the club by deliberately French kissing people.
No.
So lots of people end up getting or thinking that they had it. So at Hepatitis' peak, Michael creates this game called the Wheel of Hepatitis. And it's basically a bit like Wheel of Fortune. People who thought they had it but didn't know how they got it, would then come up on stage, they would spin the wheel, and wherever it landed would be the person who gave it to you, along with a funny description of how you caught it. So like it would be like, you caught hepatitis from Michelle Visage by drinking her boob sweat, or something ridiculous like that. And it became really popular. It was all in the magazines and stuff.
Yeah, but the hepatitis can be quite serious, right?
It's hugely serious. I think it's like a brain thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and people going, oh yeah, I've got it. Oh, it's really funny. Yeah,
it became really cool to kind of say, yeah, I've got Hep B.
Yeah, got Hep B.
Oh, yeah,
I got it from a donkey.
Yeah, or Michelle Visage. Right. So I've rambled on a bit about what these club nights are. We've explored New York in the 80s, the city in this transition from the kind of the fading rock disco era towards the electronic dance and techno, all unfolding in the shadow of the AIDS epidemic. We've also gotten an intriguing glimpse into kind of the world of the club kids and the outrageous nightlife that Michael helped build. Now feels like a perfect time to take a quick break. And when we get back, I'm going to introduce you to Angel Melendez, the fellow club kid whose tragic murder at Michael's hands would ultimately mark the end of this era.
Ooh, sounds good.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
So Adam, we're back. What have you learned so far?
Well, Kyle, I've learned that whilst I always thought club kids were cool, I do not want to go partying with them.
No, not at this age.
This is horrendous. Some of the things they did in that club, I feel like I need a shower right now.
Especially the hepatitis B kind of game that he would play.
And the champagne anemone.
Nenema.
Anemone.
Have you had your nenema? By this point, Michael starts employing kind of club-sponsored drug dealers for the sole purpose of keeping everyone well supplied with whatever drugs that they wanted. And this is really controversial because Peter Gatien says that he has no idea that this was happening, which is impossible because he was always at the fucking club. So he must have known, but he says apparently that he didn't. One of the dealers that he hires is a man named Angel Melendez, aka Angel. He was super well known for his 6-foot angel wings that he would wear. He's originally from Colombia, and when he was 8, his family moved to New Jersey, and at some point during his early 20s, he came to kind of the city to try and find his tribe. But people really don't like him. They call him like a poser, and they treat him as a little bit of an outcast, which is really ironic considering like the reason the club kids existed in the first place is because they were all once outcasts themselves, right? So they have this sort of hierarchy, clickiness going on. Again, they've become the exact same thing that they were parodying from the Celebritons. Angel learns very quickly that he can actually get into the circle if he's a drug dealer. This isn't what he wanted, but at least he has like his foot in the door and he's got a chance of eventually being accepted in some way. It's also around about this time in 1993 that Rudy Giuliani was elected as mayor, and his entire campaign was built around cleaning up the city, being tough on crime, and cracking down on drugs. And so all of Peter Gatien's clubs became primary targets. So in September 1995, during a Fed raid at the Limelight, they find a lot of evidence that drugs were being sold, which gives them license to shut the place down temporarily. They start trying to build a case against Peter for drug charges and racketeering. And so, with that pressure, Peter makes moves to fire anyone known to be selling drugs in his clubs, which of course included
Angel.
So Angel is now out on the streets. He's got no job. He's also actually homeless. So Michael lets Angel live with him for a while, which is wildly unpopular with the other club kids. But remember, Michael is in a drug spiral. So by having kind of Angel near him means that he can have some good access to regular drugs by letting him stay with him.
He's got a live-in dealer.
That's exactly it. He has a live-in dealer. And of course, at the time, Michael was living in this luxury apartment on Peter's dime. And while they lived together, There's loads of tension that starts brewing up between them because Michael doesn't actually like him. He's just keeping him around to gain access to drugs. Exactly. One night in the winter of 1996, James and Michael, they get trapped in his apartment after a snowstorm. Apparently, Angel was trapped somewhere else. And so with nothing to do, Michael and James raid Angel's drugs and they end up using a couple $1,000 of his drugs.
How much did they take?
An absolute shit ton. When Angel comes back, of course, he's furious. For Michael, he has no pretense about replacing the drugs or being apologetic or anything. He just does not care. They have a massive fight. Angel beats Michael up with a platform shoe, and essentially their friendship is now over. But he still wants to be made whole for the drugs that he's obviously stolen. Mm-hmm. By this point, the Limelight has now reopened. There were DEA agents dotted all throughout the club. They send agents dressed up as club kids in sort of like a honey trap move to try and lure people in and get them busted. Mm-hmm. It's glaringly obvious who they all are, but regardless, everyone is on their best behavior. Angel shows up at the club that night and he obviously is looking for his money. Michael then instructs the bouncers to throw him out because, of course, he's not supposed to be there. It's completely humiliating for poor Angel. And now everyone is just laughing at him. So that just feeds into his anxiety that he's just not accepted amongst the club kids. Eventually, Angel has enough. And the next day, on Sunday, the 17th of March, 1996, around 10 a.m., Angel turns up at Michael's apartment demanding that he gives him the money that he owes. Michael's new kind of live-in dealer, a guy called Robert Riggs, who is also known as Freeze. I'm going to call him Freeze from now on. He comes out of his room and he jumps to Michael's defense saying, "This is why no one likes you, Angel. Like, if you weren't a drug dealer, you wouldn't have any friends." So that's a really cool thing to say.
Really harsh. Poor Angel. All he's doing is just wanting to live his life, supply a few drugs.
He wants to find his tribe. Exactly. Of course, sensitive Angel, he completely loses it. He pushes Michael into a glass cabinet, which smashes and gashes the back of Michael's neck, and there's just blood everywhere. Angel then jumps on Michael. He's biting him. He's trying to strangle him. Michael is screaming for Freeze to kind of help. Freeze can't get Angel to stop biting him, so he grabs a hammer and he hits Angel over the head. Angel barely flinches, so Freeze has to hit him 2 more times before Angel finally just slumps to the ground. According to Freeze, Michael begins to smother Angel with a sweatshirt. When he knows that he's out, he grabs a bottle of drain cleaner and he pours it into Angel's mouth before taping it shut with duct tape.
That's awful. That's horrendous. Fair enough, Angel attacked him, but if he's knocked out cold, just...
Yeah. Thing is, though, that's exactly my point. At this point, you could have had a way out. You could have just called the police and said, "I got attacked and was self-defense." Right? Yeah. There's no way going back now, right?
You've just poured bloody...
drain cleaner in someone's mouth and taped it shut.
Yeah.
At this point, they have no idea whether or not he's alive or dead. So they strip all of his clothes off and together they drag his body to the bathtub. They submerge him in water to see if they can see any air bubbles. I'm like, just check for a pulse.
Yeah, like get a mirror, feel his pulse, bloody submerge him in water. Oh, now we've drowned him. Idiots.
So they realize that, of course, he's not going to wake up. And like I said, maybe at this point, with the exception of the drain cleaner, they could have just called the cops and claimed like self-defense. But no. Michael explains that they didn't call the cops because the apartment was just filled with Angel's drugs.
Yeah, but they're Angel's drugs.
Yeah, but he could be implicated in it, but that's his explanation. Whether or not it's rationalized or not, I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
So instead, they decide that they're going to cover Angel's body in ice. They also cover him in baking soda and even more drain cleaner to stop him from decomposing while they try and work out what they're going to do next.
Does that do that?
I have no idea. It doesn't, because you're going to find out what happens in a second. Next, what they do is they gather up all Angel's drugs and they just leave, and they're gone for a week. What they are doing is just using all of Angel's drugs, and so they get really fucked up. Eventually, the week is over, and they decide that they need to go back to the apartment and deal with the situation, because this entire time, Freeze has just been having the worst trip, because he's petrified of what's going to happen to them, right?
Oh, yeah.
So Michael keeps trying to convince Freeze that Angel might have just woken up and just left.
Oh my God.
That's how fucked up they are.
Yeah, he's gone and no grudges. He's just gone off.
Yeah, he won't be there. Of course, they get back. Angel is still dead in the bathtub. The baking soda and the drain cleaner didn't help. It only accelerated the decomposition process. So this time, they need to now try and deal with the smell, right? So what they do is they put more baking soda and more drain cleaner on him.
How is that going to, like, cover up the smell?
No idea.
If anything, that's going to make him perhaps decompose quicker, which might not necessarily be a bad thing if you're trying to hide a body, but that's not going to hide the smell.
I don't think it's going to reduce him down to a mush. But my point is, the reason why they're trying to deal with the smell is because they're having a party that night.
Oh my God. What's wrong with these people?
So a ton of people show up. Of course, they tell everyone not to go into the bathroom. They're saying that they're having plumbing issues. People are like, oh, that's what that smell is?
It smells like a rotting corpse.
Exactly.
I'm surprised no one actually went in the bathroom. And I just think, like, people are high probably.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to go in that bathroom.
If they went in there high, they probably wouldn't know what they're looking at.
Oh, God.
So like I said, 10 days into this, they realize that they need to take action. So Freeze takes a trip to Macy's. He buys a meat cleaver and a few knives. Freeze just does not have the stomach to deal with what's coming next. So Michael says to Freeze, if you give me 10 bags of heroin, I will deal with Angel's body.
Wow.
So they both get really fucked up. Then Michael goes into the bathroom. He cuts off Angel's limbs while Freeze stands in the doorway spraying Calvin Klein Eternity in the bathroom.
Oh my God. What is wrong with these gays? Poor Angel. This feels like it's out of some kind of weird comedy movie.
Yes, it does. Totally. There is a film about this called Party Monsters.
Oh, and that's about this particular story.
It's about this particular story. Do you know who it stars? Do you know this film?
Oh, Macaulay Culkin, right?
Macaulay Culkin and Seth Green.
And do they play Freeze and this?
No,
Michael?
so Macaulay Culkin plays Michael. Alig,
yeah.
And James is Seth Green.
Okay.
And they're really over the top. If you don't know anything about the Club Kids of New York or James or Michael Alig, you would think this is the worst acting you've ever seen in your life. But it is so accurate and so precise. It's just a work of genius. I do have, however, a slight issue with their use of gay voice because they're straight actors and that's kind of our thing. It's like cultural appropriation, you know?
I think we've got other things to worry about here. This person, Angel, has
Yes,
died.
Angel. They place Angel's legs into a duffel bag and they dump that into the Hudson River. Freeze then finds a big corrugated kind of box in the basement where they place Angel's torso in his arms and they seal it up with duct tape. They don't realize that the box is actually lined with cork, which is going to be a big problem for them later on. Next, they drag the box into the elevator. Now, there are some rumors that the box hung around for another 7 days. In fact, people came over and they used it as a footrest, not knowing what was inside the box. But I couldn't verify that. Yeah, exactly. Like, what about the smell? But it gets to the point where they load the box into the elevator. They drag it through the lobby. By a stroke of luck, there is a cab driver that's parked right outside, and he agrees to take them to the West Side Highway on 25th Street. And they pay the cab driver an extra $20 to help them lift the box in and out of the boot. And then he helps them carry it across the street, and together they throw the box into the Hudson River. And the cab driver is like, dude, what's in the box?
I was going to say, is he not like, this box stinks, and why are we throwing it in the river?
Exactly. Do you know what they say?
What?
They say, oh, it's just some old dinner plates that we didn't want to dump in the garbage.
So the river is okay. I'm sorry. And the cab driver's just like, I've got 20 quid or bucks.
Yeah. And he's just like, yeah, okay, sounds plausible to me. And because the box is lined with cork, it just bobs on the surface of the water. Freeze freaks the fuck out. He tries to jump in the water to get it back. Michael has to talk him out of it. And the cab driver's just there like, dude, it's just some old plates.
It's like, yeah, the plates. On second thoughts, we will wash them.
And so they just get back into the cab and the cab driver takes them back to Michael's apartment. But that cab driver must have known something was up, right? And there's no record of any cab driver coming forward.
Really? Well, because they probably would have been questioned like, really? You bought this story? Of course they're not going to come forward.
I guess so. Yeah, that's plausible. So now, Angel is, of course, dead. His torso is floating in the Hudson. Kids all over the city obviously still need their drugs from Angel. And when they beep Angel's beeper to buy drugs, Michael is the one who gets back to them.
Right.
Of course, they're like, what's going on? Where's Angel? Why do you have all these drugs? Why do you have a massive gash in the back of your neck? Why are you wearing Angel's boots? We all thought that you hated him.
Yeah, this is not going to be good for his alibi or, I don't know, defense.
No. Michael tells him, oh yeah, I killed Angel and I stole all his drugs. And yeah, I also stole his boots.
Oh, okay. So no, he is being honest.
Yeah, 100% honest. It's crazy. Here's the thing. Nobody knows whether or not to believe Michael because he's built his entire persona on saying outrageous stuff for attention or for shock value. So they literally just laugh it off. Also, in the 1990s, like kids went missing all the time, especially in New York. Mostly they left the city without warning. Sometimes they committed suicide or they ended up ODing. And so there's a sort of desensitization when it came to their mates disappearing or dying, right? They reckon that Angel probably just left the city and Michael was spinning this to his own advantage because he's built his entire persona on saying outrageous things. So these rumors just start to spread, which at first just seem like they're tongue-in-cheek. There are rumors like, I heard that Angel's body is like stuck in someone's freezer in Brooklyn. I heard that Michael hit Angel over the head with a hammer. I heard that Freeze had sex with Angel's naked body. I heard that he threw Angel's legs in the Hudson, for example.
That bit is true.
That's the thing. What is wild is that every single one of these rumors is rooted in truth because they started with Michael.
Right.
So it's really interesting that Michael is hiding in plain sight. Like he can shock all his friends and he can distance himself from what he's done. And because of what he is like, nobody really takes it seriously. So as we know, eventually a storm washes Angel's body up onto Staten Island. 3 kids discover the body. And at first, Angel is misidentified as he's Asian. They visit like Chinatown to see if anyone was missing someone. Nobody comes forward. And even when Angel's family finally report him missing, they never connect the dots because Angel was Colombian. So that's real sad. So around this time that Angel's body is found, Michael decides that he needs to go on a road trip. We're not sure why. He says that he wanted to check himself into a rehab clinic in Colorado. Others think it was kind of to distance himself from the crime and his inability to shut the fuck up and stop telling people that he killed Angel.
Yeah, I guess this in the newspaper, they found this body, they're looking. They must be getting a little bit scared about what's going to happen.
But I think what's probably more close to the truth is that he now has got all of Angel's drugs. He's got $18,000 of Angel's money, and he just wants to go off and blow it all off.
This guy sounds like a right...
He's in a nightmare.
A nightmare is worse than that. He's like a bloody murderer, number one.
It's true. We probably need to be a little more sensitive to the fact that a young man has died. So Michael and his friend Gitzy, they hit the road. They travel towards Chicago where they meet up with their friend, a woman called Screamin' Rachel.
And why'd she get that name?
I don't know, on the club kid scene somewhere. So if the trip was to prevent him from telling people what he did, then he completely fails miserably because he tells Screamin' Rachel everything. Michael instantly regrets this because she actually really likes Angel. And Michael kind of knows this as well, but he just has no self-control. So when they leave Chicago, Rachel needs an outlet for how she's feeling, and she writes a dance song called Murder in Clubland, and in it, she embeds the backwards lyrics on repeat saying, Michael, where is Angel?
Interesting. How does she do that backwards? She records it and then puts it into the track?
Into reverse, yeah, because they did that loads in the 60s, didn't they, during the Satanic Panic, where people were like, oh, there's satanic verses hidden in records and things like that. This is kind of along those lines. So Michael and Gitzy, they get back on the road. They meander towards Denver. They are so severely addicted to heroin, which they need to take every few hours just to stave off the withdrawals at this point. So their window of productivity is very short, which is why this trip ends up taking 5 weeks.
Oh my God.
That's so high.
That is so much heroin. I'm surprised the body can withstand that much heroin.
That's the thing, though. Like, heroin's a serious drug, and that puts people to sleep permanently, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Eventually, they arrive in Colorado, and they're like, so I guess it's time to check ourselves into rehab? They're like, lol, no, should we just break into that veterinarian and see if we can get some ketamine?
Oh my God. These people are the worst.
They are the worst. They break in, it's pitch black, and while rummaging around the medicines, they open up a freezer, which Michael pulls out a dead cat and freaks them the fuck out, and they just run off. At that point, they're just like, should we just go back to New York City?
After all of this.
All of that, they didn't even get to the rehab club. So when they get back to New York, the rumor mill is still in full force. And at this time, it's all over Page 6 and also in The Village Voice and other publications. It all kicks off when a fellow club kid and journalist for The Village Voice writes like a blind item, which is basically like a piece that says, I'm not naming any names, but this is the word in the street.
Right, okay.
And basically, it talks about the alleged rumors that have been going around. Following that, Angel's brother actually comes looking for him, and he puts out a bunch of posters. He's asking around, even offering like a $4,000 reward. And so at this point, people are starting to question whether or not this is all true, because normally these club kids, they just skip town.
Yeah.
But no family members then come looking for them.
Yeah, so this now looks suspect, and actually people are questioning, Michael, did he know something? Did he actually do it?
Exactly. But then Screamin' Rachel, she comes forward. She releases her single, Murder in Clubland, with that creepy backwards lyric saying, Michael, where is Angel? By now, The Village Voice is now running with another item. This time, they are naming names. And of course, Michael is directly implicated here. And from there, it just gets into all the gossip columns around the city who start running their own pieces.
He was stupid I'm not condoning it, but to tell everyone and blab everywhere.
I know. He just does not have any self-control. So when Michael returns to the city, this is literally what he's stepping into. But even though the story is everywhere, Michael is not arrested or even questioned by the cops. And that's because the cops were grooming him to testify against Peter Gatien in his drug and racketeering trial.
Right, okay.
Basically, they didn't care that someone was murdered. They were out to get what they saw as a bigger fish as part of kind of Mayor Rudy Giuliani's effort to clean up the city. Mm-hmm. And so Michael starts feeling like he is untouchable. At one point, he's doing some promo work on camera and the interviewer asks him about the rumors and he says directly to the camera in a sort of laughing way, Angel was one of those copycats that we hated, so we killed him. He then pauses. He looks down for a moment, realizes once again that he cannot control what he says. He looks off camera and says, regretfully, this is the kind of thing that gets me into trouble.
I can't believe he's just confessing left, right, and centre. But he's
mad.
Not, and people aren't really paying attention to this yet.
Eventually, the police finally feel pressured to look into the allegations. There's a lot of back and forth between Michael and the police. They say that if he testifies against Peter Gatien, they will consolidate all his charges against him for a total of 3 years. But even at this point, Michael is like, I'm not sure. I need to think about it.
Right.
So he goes off. While all this is going on, Michael tries to make a comeback. He gets like thousands of these little mini kind of jars of honey, which he creates a custom label for called Honey Trap, Michael Alig, Where to Meet, etc., which club it was, and he hands them all out the city. It does not do well at all. And this is kind of the sort of eye-opening moment for him that people actually are suspicious that he did actually kill Angel. Because before they just thought, oh, Michael's just saying crazy shit again, right? Mm-hmm. But now people are starting to actively distance themselves from him and his nightclubs. At some point, with all the swirling media attention, a cop in Staten Island stumbles upon an article about all the alleged rumors and allegations that were swirling around the scene. He notices that the body that they found, which they misidentified as East Asian, seemed to fit all the rumors that he was seeing in these papers.
The fact that the body was cut up and everything like that.
Exactly, yes. So like Angel was hit over the head 3 times with a hammer. So the body they found clearly had 3 wounds on the back of the head. They heard that Angel had his legs cut off. The body that they had didn't have any legs. They heard that Angel was stuffed in a box and thrown into the Hudson. And the cop was like, hang on a minute, this sounds like the body that we have.
I feel like the police should just take notice of this page 6 a lot more often.
It's a different jurisdiction, right? Staten Island is in New Jersey.
Yeah.
But they're probably not thinking outside of their jurisdiction, essentially. They probably investigated it all in Staten Island. At one point, they did go to Chinatown, but that's because the body was misidentified. And so it's at this point that they connect all the dots. Angel's body is finally identified. And by this point, Michael is now hiding out in a hotel in New Jersey with his boyfriend. And so in early December, they arrest Michael and freeze. And Freeze says that when the cops approached him and touched him on the back of his shoulder, this kind of wave of relief just washed over him that this is all now over. So they are sent to Rikers Island, and because the DA still want him to testify against Peter Gatien, they visit him in prison to get the ball moving before this wall that Michael is facing closes in on himself. But because he is so sick from heroin withdrawals, he can't answer any of their questions.
This guy must be in such a state.
What they do is they check him out of Rikers Island, they drive him to his heroin dealer, and they let him shoot up in the back of their car just so that he will cooperate.
Really?
This is the DEA, a federal agency. When this comes out, it's a huge scandal. So the DEA are forced to completely rescind their deal and they completely drop Michael as a witness altogether.
Oh,
so he's
now
fucked himself.
Yeah, and so now he can't use this to get himself a lenient sentence.
Exactly. They both end up getting between 10 to 20 years in exchange for pleading guilty to manslaughter. Peter Gatien is fully acquitted based on a lack of evidence, but he is deported back to Canada for tax evasion and he loses all of his clubs.
And in fairness, he is a corrupt or slightly crooked businessman. Mm-hmm. He hasn't killed anyone.
No, he hasn't.
So I feel like, do you know what? That's okay.
But hasn't he? Like, you think by facilitating or allowing drugs to be sold openly, even though he denies that, how many lives have been lost at your hands by people overdosing?
Yeah, and getting into this state. Fair point.
Yeah. Michael does not do well in prison. He is repeatedly raped. He has to spend a lot of time in a psychiatric unit. And because he keeps getting busted for using drugs, he ends up being locked up for 5 years in solitary confinement.
How did he get busted for drugs?
I guess drugs make their way in the prison, right?
Wow. And I guess he's never gone through a proper rehab or anything.
No.
So
I guess this is the best kind of rehab, right? Complete cold turkey. You're inside solitary confinement, 23 hours a day.
oof.
Certainly going to be one way to help you get clean. Freeze is eventually paroled in 2010 for good behavior. And Michael is eventually released after 17 years in prison in 2014. And the thing is, though, he's just not prepared for release at all. Jameson James calls him up to kind of prep him. And he's like, let me tell you what's in the world now. Anybody from anywhere can be what we were because of the internet. Let me tell you about Instagram.
Yeah, I guess if he went away in the 90s, yeah, he missed out on a lot. Like coming about the internet becoming what it is today.
Sure. And all that fame that he gained during the 90s was all driven through Page Six and these publications, right? And these talk shows that he would go on.
And now anyone can get themselves famous on Instagram and all that sort of stuff, influencers.
Exactly. But also what's wild is that Michael's never used a cell phone before. Of course, he's never been on the internet. When he's released, a group of the surviving club kids all meet him at the prison gates where they have a massive van loaded with booze and they take him on a tour of the city. And he is just shocked by how it's transformed. Times Square, of course, now a huge tourist attraction, far removed from the porn theaters and the massage clubs that used to be there. Everything is now, of course, clean and glamorous and there's lots of wealth everywhere. People on the street, they still recognize him. They're shouting at him, welcome back, Michael. Don't kill any more of your drug dealers.
Yeah, I don't know why he's got this support. This guy is a murderer at the end of the day. Yeah, okay, it's manslaughter if you want, but he hid the body. He did all this deliberate stuff afterwards and joked about it and was so blasé.
So brazenly joking about it as well.
I don't think he deserves this.
No, he doesn't. He absolutely does not. And it's about to get a lot worse because 17 years in prison, you would think, does he have any remorse?
Yeah, has he become a better person? Has he rehabilitated? But I'm getting the sense that he probably hasn't.
Well, Jameson James takes him to the spot in Chelsea where they dumped Angel's body in the Hudson. And they're kind of reflecting on everything that's happened. And I'm paraphrasing here, but Jameson James says, you know, it's funny. I remember the night that you told Jenny at the Limelight and she just ran out crying. Do you remember that? And Michael is like, it was just too much for me. I told everyone that way it would become everyone else's problem. That's the junkie mentality. If I'm going down, then you're all coming down with me. And I'm not blaming the drugs. It was my decision to use the drugs. But the symptoms of drug addiction almost mirrors the exact symptoms of being a sociopath, like the selfishness and the narcissism. James then says, how are you going to change? How are you going to be better? And Michael says, I think it's a work in progress. I think I could never say that I've changed, but I am different. I am better now. I don't think anyone that was involved in this will ever be better, but we're heading in the direction of getting better, hopefully. Then the conversation comes to an end. Michael looks around and notices how different everything is. And he says, what a nice place to dispose of a body. We should come back every year. He's just outrageous.
Yeah, just stop. You almost said something somewhat sentimental or nice, or do you know what I mean, in terms of like you have acknowledged that there is some change in you.
Sure.
And then you go and do that.
And it's a big question. I did ponder over whether or not he did feel remorse. And a part of me wants to say that he does. But when he says these things, it's just like he's just had a tender moment. And that's awkward and uncomfortable for him. And so you end that moment with saying something outrageous, where it brings it back to the level that you're used to being with those barriers up. So it's really interesting. You could argue that he shows no remorse. I think that he does have remorse, but he's just got this really strange attention-seeking personality.
Maybe, but then I think if you really had remorse, I don't know. I don't know if you'd make that joke. That's my theory anyway.
6 years later, though, at the age of 54, Michael is found dead from an overdose on Christmas Eve 2020, and he had mixed heroin and fentanyl. And that's just another reflection on how times have changed, because we know how dangerous fentanyl can be nowadays, right? It's a huge epidemic across America. So think back when they would play that game, What's My Line?
Yeah.
How dangerous would it have been if fentanyl was spiked in those drugs?
Exactly.
How many more lives would have been lost? You definitely couldn't do that today.
No. I mean, it sounds like he's never really been properly treated for his drug addiction. I don't know. That doesn't feel like there's probably a way back for him, considering everything he did and got up to. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it's crazy. And Adam, that is the story of Michael Alig, the club kid who murdered Angel Melendez.
Wow, I had no idea that was how the club kids came to be. And that's how the club kids ended, because when he went to prison, pretty much that died out.
Yeah, New York got cleaned up.
Yeah, late 90s, that's very, what's it, like Dawson's Creek, Buffy, that kind of era, more like rock indie bands and things kind of making their way through. Yeah, interesting.
It's just crazy. I don't know. Would I want to have gone back to the 90s and experienced the club kid movements? I think I would say yes to that. I'd like to.
Yes, in the sense that I think hopefully there are some like offshoots of that culture which didn't involve brains and liver and I don't know, stuff being shot out of someone's butt. But it seems like it could have been fun. I don't know. They took it to the extreme.
They did. Yeah.
And that's what's wild.
If you guys want to find out more, there are loads of documentaries out there. The documentary that I watched was the shockumentary that the Party Monsters film with Macaulay Culkin and Seth Green was based on by the same name, Party Monsters, which is essentially a documentary that is all talking heads of the original club kids of New York City that was around Michael at the time. If you're going to watch Party Monsters with Macaulay Culkin or the shockumentary, I'd opt for the shockumentary just because there's actual real footage of the shit that they would do, which is just wild.
Yeah, I guess there's no dramatization. You're hearing it from the horse's mouth.
But yeah, so should we run the outro for this week?
Let's do it.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating foray into the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating things. We hope you enjoy the ride as much as we did.
And if today's episode sparked your curiosity, do us a favor and follow us on your favorite podcast app. It truly makes a world of difference and helps more people discover the show.
And for our dedicated freaks out there, don't forget next week's episode is already waiting for you on our Patreon and it's completely free to access.
And if you want even more, join our Certified Freaks tier to unlock the entire archive, delve into exclusive content, and get a sneak peek at what's coming next. We'd love for you to be part of our growing community.
We drop new episodes every Tuesday, and until then, remember, the brightest stars sometimes burn out fast, especially when fueled by glitter, glamour, and way too many drugs. See you next time.
See you next time.